I am Akira Cotton, and at 39, I never thought I'd have to face those ghosts again. 16 years. 16 years since the day the Thorne family erased me from their lives simply because I chose a service uniform over a debutante gown. Standing in my high-tech fortress here in McLean, Virginia, as the CEO of Sentinel Dynamics, I thought I had buried that past. But through my security cameras, I saw them all standing there. The faces that once looked at me with contempt now etched with desperation. They had come, not for an apology, but for a piece of the success they once called my disgrace. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button before we dive into the story of how I watched the color drain from their faces when they realized what was coming. They thought this was a reunion. They were wrong. This was a reckoning. In my home office, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Virginia woods, I wasn't watching daytime TV. I was tracking pirate skiffs off the coast of Somalia on a live satellite feed for a client. My world now is one of order, data, and the deep, satisfying silence that comes with absolute control. It's a silence I fought for. One I engineered to permanently drown out the helpless, chaotic noise that the Thorne family once called my life. This entire estate is a testament to that vow. I built it not just as a home, but as a sanctuary. Secured by the very technology my company, Sentinel Dynamics, provides to governments and Fortune 500 corporations. The perimeter is protected by layers of unseen defenses, infrared fences that can distinguish a deer from a man, and seismic sensors that can detect a footstep a quarter-mile away. My head of security is a man I served with, a former Delta Force operator who leads a team of men just like him. This place was designed to be impregnable, a physical manifestation of the walls I'd built around my heart. I would never be vulnerable again. A single, elegant beep sliced through the quiet. It wasn't a jarring alarm, just a calm notification from the integrated AI. Access request, main gate, the synthesized voice stated, devoid of emotion. My fingers moved instinctively to the touch panel on my desk. I swiped, and the satellite feed from the Horn of Africa was replaced by the high-definition view from my front gate. And in that instant, the carefully constructed silence of my world was shattered. My world stopped on a single, silent beat. There, displayed in stunning 4K resolution, I saw them. They had arrived in an old, beaten-down Lincoln Navigator, the kind of luxury SUV that was impressive 15 years ago, but now just looked tired. Rust was blooming like a dark fungus around the wheel wells. At the wheel sat Silas Thorne, my foster father. The once imposing posture that used to terrify me was gone, replaced by the weary slump of a defeated man. His hair was a thin, shocking silver. Beside him, Genevieve, his wife, was adjusting her scarf, a pathetic attempt to project the old money elegance that had long since withered away. In the back, I could see Sterling, the golden boy brother, looking constrained and bitter in a suit with a cheap synthetic sheen. And next to him was my foster sister, Serafina, her arms wrapped tightly around two small children who stared out the window, their faces blank with confusion. My training overrode any emotional response. There was no surge of panic, no gut punch of grief. My heart did not beat any faster. My breathing remained slow and steady, a disciplined rhythm honed on battlefields where a gasp could get you killed. I was conditioned to control the adrenaline, to use it as a tool, not be ruled by it. This was simply a new variable, an unexpected threat vector that needed to be assessed. I engaged the camera's zoom, the lens tightening on their faces with unnerving clarity. It was a portrait of desperation. I saw it in the deep lines of failure carved into Silas's face. I saw it in the undisguised acid envy in Serafina's eyes as she took in the scale of my property. I saw it in the deflated arrogance of Sterling, a prince whose kingdom had crumbled, and Genevieve. She was putting on a performance. Her face was a mask of practiced regret, an actress playing a part she hoped would earn her a handout. My mind immediately began running the OODA loop, the decision-making cycle that had saved my life more than once. Observe, orient, decide, act, observe, 4 adults, 2 children. a vehicle in disrepair. Body language projects defeat and desperation. They are a delegation of supplicants. Orient. This event is preceded by 16 years of absolute silence, initiated by them after a lifetime of escalating emotional abuse and public humiliation. Decide. Their motive is not reconciliation. It is not remorse. They are here because every other door has closed. They are weak, wounded, and they are looking for a soft target to exploit for resources. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a profound, hollow coldness. An old piece of advice from General Marcus Cole, the 4-star general who became my true mentor, echoed in my mind. Akira, he'd told me once sitting across from me in a dusty tent in Afghanistan, never, ever let your enemy choose the battlefield. You control the terrain. You control the terms of engagement. You control the outcome. Meeting them at the gate, on their terms, would be a mistake. It would invite a scene, a theatrical display of emotion designed to disarm me. I would not cede that ground. My hand moved to the intercom panel, my finger pressing the button with firm, deliberate pressure. My voice, when I spoke, was as level and cool as the polished steel of my desk. It was the voice I used to give orders, a voice that carried unquestionable authority. Marcus, let them in, I said, my tone flat. Escort them to conference room 3. Full security sweep. No weapons, no recording devices. I'll be down in 10 minutes. I released the button, cutting the connection. They would not be welcomed into my home. They would be processed. They would be taken to a sterile, windowless room built for tense negotiations. A room with acoustics so perfect you could hear a man's pulse quicken. A room where I controlled everything, down to the temperature. They thought this was a family reunion. They were wrong. This was a debriefing, and I was the commanding officer. My eyes remained locked on the monitor, fixed on the pathetic, defeated image of Silas Thorne. That face, a memory surfaced, sharp as shattered glass. I had seen that same face look very different once. I had seen it twisted with a power and a rage that had nearly destroyed me on the day they cast me out and told me I was nothing. The face on my security monitor, the weak, defeated face of Silas Thorne, began to blur. It dissolved into a memory, 16 years old but still razor-sharp, of that same face twisted with righteous fury. The family that stood at my gate today as beggars were once my judges, jury, and executioners. Their return wasn't just an inconvenience, it was the resurfacing of a map of old wounds, each location a monument to a specific humiliation. The first mark on that map was drawn at Christmas, when I was 16. We were at the Thorns' annual holiday gala at the Chevy Chase Country Club, a suffocating affair of glittering chandeliers, fake smiles, and bourbon-fueled business deals. It was a place where your worth was measured by your last name and the university decal on your car. I stood awkwardly by the towering Christmas tree, feeling like a soldier in enemy territory. It was time for the family gifts. Sterling, then 20, unwrapped a box to reveal a gleaming Rolex watch. He held it up with a practiced air of casual entitlement. Serafina, 18, squealed with delight as she opened an envelope containing plane tickets and a credit card for a shopping spree in Paris. Then, my grandmother, Theodora Vance, Genevieve's mother and the only person in that family who ever truly saw me, handed me a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound first edition of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. My heart swelled. She understood my fascination with strategy, with discipline, with the military. She saw it not as a flaw, but as a strength. But as I held the book, Serafina let out a tinkling, cruel laugh. Her voice cut through the polite chatter, loud enough for the nearby families to hear. "Oh my God," she chirped. "More toys for Akira's little soldiers. Be careful, or she'll start digging a trench in the rose garden." A ripple of condescending chuckles went through the guests. I looked to Silas and Genevieve for help, for any sign of defense. They just offered tight, polite smiles, the kind you give when a child has said something mildly embarrassing but true. Their silence was a verdict. In that moment, surrounded by warmth and glittering lights, I'd never felt so cold or alone. That humiliation was a chilling premonition of what was to come. The next landmark on my map of shame was etched in the pouring Georgia rain. I was 18, standing at attention on the parade ground at Fort Benning, having just graduated from basic training. It was one of the proudest, most grueling, and most transformative achievements of my life. Around me, the field was a sea of joyous reunions. Mothers were weeping as they hugged their sons. Fathers were clapping their daughters on the back with overwhelming pride. I scanned the crowd, my heart pounding with a desperate, foolish hope. I had called them. I had sent them the date, the time, the details. I'd thought maybe, just maybe, this achievement would be enough for them to see me. But no one came. The ceremony ended, and I stood there, drenched and invisible, as the crowds thinned out. That night, huddled in the barracks on a cheap, cracking smartphone, I logged onto social media. And there it was, a flood of pictures posted by Serafina. The entire Thorne family was dressed to the nines, smiling and raising champagne glasses at the country club. The caption read, "Celebrating Sterling's amazing new internship. So proud of our future titan of industry." It was an unpaid summer internship at a friend of Silas's law firm. My graduation wasn't just forgotten. It was consciously and deliberately erased, deemed less important than a glorified coffee run for my foster brother. I didn't exist. My uniform, my service, my sacrifice. It was a stain on their perfect family portrait, so they simply painted over me. The final catastrophic event came a year later, after my grandmother Theodora passed. We were gathered in a sterile lawyer's office for the reading of her will. Sterling and Serafina were already divvying up her jewelry and property in hushed, greedy whispers. When it was my turn, the lawyer announced she had left me two things: her personal silver locket and a check for $5,000. Sterling scoffed audibly. "Is that it? All that fuss over a trinket and pocket change?" But then the lawyer cleared his throat and read a personal note Theodora had left. Her words filled the silent room. To my granddaughter, Akira, remember that loyalty and honor make a family, not blood. Always follow the path your heart and your honor dictate, and let no one else decide your direction. Something inside Silas snapped. The carefully maintained facade of the respectable McLean lawyer crumbled into dust. He shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "Blood is all that matters," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. He finally screamed the truth he had so carefully concealed my entire life. "You were an obligation. Your parents died, and I was saddled with you. You have no Thorne blood. You have no right to that name, no claim to anything in this family. You are nothing to us." His words were hammer blows. I looked at Genevieve. She stood frozen, her face a mask of cold stone. Her silence was his accomplice. "Get out!" Silas spat, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Take your trinket and your pity money and get out of our lives, and never come back." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Years of their dismissals and quiet humiliations had forged something hard and unbreakable inside me. I stood up, my back ramrod straight in my service uniform. I looked at each of them, one by one, memorizing their faces for the last time. Silas, consumed by a pathetic rage. Genevieve, her eyes cold and empty. Sterling, with a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. And Serafina, whose face was alight with pure, undisguised contempt. This was the moment she had been waiting for her whole life, their collective silence as I turned and walked toward the door as the final, deepest cut. It was the sound of my own execution. I walked out of that office, out of that building, and out of their lives forever. I had nothing but the uniform on my back, a $5,000 check in my pocket, and a silent, burning vow that echoed with every beat of my heart. They would regret this day. I wouldn't just survive their judgment. I would win. And in my hand, I clutched the silver locket, its cool metal the only proof I had that I was ever loved at all. The silver locket in my hand was cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the humid, sticky air of the tiny studio apartment I called home. After walking away from the Thorne family, I completed my military service with distinction, earning decorations I never bothered to tell them about. I thought I had survived the hardest battles of my life. I was wrong. I had just entered a new kind of war zone, a civilian world that felt more foreign than any country I'd been deployed to. This was no man's land. My discharge papers listed skills that could save lives in a firefight but were apparently worthless on a resume. Leadership experience from commanding a special ops team in hostile territory was translated by HR managers in sterile office buildings as lacks corporate management experience. My expertise in survival, navigation, and threat assessment was useless. I sent applications to dozens of private security firms, the kind of places where I thought my background would be an asset. The rejection emails, when they came, were always polite and vague. The most common ones cited that I wasn't a good culture fit. I soon learned that was code. It meant they didn't want a woman, especially a woman with my training and intensity, telling them how to do their jobs. So I took what I could get. My nights were spent in a cavernous, freezing warehouse in Norfolk, Virginia, doing 12-hour shifts as a security guard. I'd walk the perimeter, the silence of the place a hollow echo of the controlled quiet I would one day build for myself. My days were spent in that rundown apartment, where the walls were so thin I could hear every argument, every slammed door, every weeping child from my neighbors. I was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. The $5,000 from my grandmother was dwindling fast, eaten away by rent, instant noodles, and cheap coffee. I felt lost, adrift in a world I'd fought to protect but no longer understood. One morning, I found myself in the sterile, beige waiting room of the local Veterans Affairs office, trying to apply for the GI Bill education benefits I had earned. I took a number, 342s, and sat down for what I knew would be a long wait. The man who sat next to me was an older Marine, his face a roadmap of hard years, one pant leg neatly folded and pinned where his leg used to be. He noticed my posture, the way I sat straight-backed, scanning the room. "Just got out?" he asked, his voice raspy. I nodded. "Army." He gave a slow, understanding nod. We sat in silence for a bit, then he told me about his own war. The one in the desert, and the longer, harder war he fought with PTSD and bureaucratic red tape when he came home. He looked at me with weary, knowing eyes. "They teach you how to die for the flag, kid," he said, his voice dropping low. "But nobody teaches you how to live under it when you get back home." Hours later, I was finally called to a window, only to be told by a bored clerk that my paperwork had been misplaced and I'd have to file it all again. I walked out of that building not angry, but with a cold, hard clarity. The old Marine's words echoed in my head. He was right. The system designed to help us was broken. I couldn't just fight for myself anymore. I had to build something better, a new path for people like him, for people like me. That's when the idea for Sentinel Dynamics was born. Not just another security company, but a revolutionary firm that would merge my battlefield experience in human intelligence with cutting-edge AI and predictive analytics. It was a brilliant concept, one that could change the industry. The problem was, I was the only one who believed it. I polished my business plan, put on the only decent blazer I owned, and started trying to meet with investors. The rejections were swift and brutal. They saw a soldier, not a CEO. The final, most humiliating blow came during a video call with a hotshot venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, a man half my age in a designer hoodie. He listened to my pitch with a smirk, and when I was done, he laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. "Look, Miss Cotton," he said, leaning into his camera with an air of patronizing amusement. "It's a cute idea. But we invest in scalable tech companies, not mercenary squads. Have you maybe considered opening a CrossFit gym? That seems more your speed." The call ended. I sat there staring at my own reflection in the blank screen. The insult was so blatant, so dismissive, it almost shattered me. For a moment, I felt the full weight of my solitude, the crushing belief that maybe the thorns were right. Maybe I was nothing. But then, something else took over. The humiliation didn't break me. It flash-forged into pure, high-octane fuel. His condescending laugh became the rhythm of a war drum in my head. That night, I did the math. After paying next month's rent, I'd have a few $100s left. The $5,000 was almost gone. My dream was dying. But as I was scrolling through security news online, I saw an ad for DEF CON, the world's largest hacking and tech security conference happening in Las Vegas in 2 weeks. It was a long shot, a place where tech giants and government agencies scouted for the next big thing. A ticket and a flight would cost nearly every cent I had left. It was a choice between one more month of survival in Norfolk or one last, desperate gamble on myself. I couldn't sleep. I walked over to the small cracked table that served as my desk and opened a worn paperback I'd found at a thrift store, a biography of General George S. Patton. My eyes fell on a quote I'd underlined. Accept the challenges so that you can feel the exhilaration of victory. Then I took out my grandmother's silver locket. I opened the small tarnished clasp and stared at the tiny, faded pictures of my real parents inside. I remembered her note. Let no one else decide your direction. The Silicon Valley punk wasn't going to decide my direction. The bored VA clerk wasn't going to decide it. And the Thorns sure as hell weren't going to decide it. My choice was made. I sat down at my laptop, the screen illuminating my tired face in the dark room. I navigated to the airline's website, my fingers moving with a newfound certainty. There was no safety net, no backup plan, no turning back. I was tired, I was alone, and I was nearly broke. But I wasn't broken. I keyed in my information, my heart steady. Then I moved the cursor and clicked purchase. I was all in. I was stepping into no man's land, one last time, on my own terms. Stepping into the DEF CON conference in Las Vegas felt like walking onto a different planet. The air thrummed with a chaotic energy, a cacophony of electronic music, passionate arguments about code, and the constant clatter of keyboards. It was a sea of thousands of people, government agents in ill-fitting suits, punk rock hackers with neon hair, and tech evangelists preaching the gospel of the next big thing. I had $97 to my name and a hotel room booked for 2 nights. I was an anonymous ghost in this machine, armed with a desperate, all-or-nothing hope. For a full day, I was just that. A face in the crowd, absorbing information, assessing the landscape, looking for an opening. My chance came during the final keynote of the day. A top cybersecurity director was giving a speech, and the Q&A session was being moderated by a man I recognized instantly from intelligence briefings. Retired 4-star General Marcus Cole. He was a living legend, a man who had shaped modern military strategy. The questions from the audience were predictable, technical queries about encryption protocols and firewall architecture. My heart began to pound. This was it, my one shot. I found a microphone in the aisle and stood up, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "Ma'am, General," I began, my voice cutting through the technical jargon. The room quieted slightly. With the exponential rise of asymmetric warfare, why does our national security posture continue to treat cybersecurity and human intelligence, as separate domains? Our enemies don't operate in silos. They use a social engineering hack to enable a cyber attack. Why are we insisting on tying one hand behind our own back? A deep silence fell over the massive ballroom. The question hung in the air, a strategic bomb in a room full of tactical thinkers. The cybersecurity director looked momentarily stunned, but General Cole leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine from the stage. He had the kind of intense, penetrating eyes that could see straight through you. A slow, appreciative smile touched his lips. "That," he said, his voice booming through the sound system, "is the single smartest, most important question I've heard all week. Young lady, find me after this session is over." An hour later, I was sitting opposite General Cole in a quiet corner of the hotel's bourbon bar. The rich, amber liquid in my glass was more expensive than any meal I'd eaten in a year. He didn't waste time with small talk or pleasantries. He didn't ask where I went to college or to see my resume. He looked at me, really looked at me, and asked the questions that mattered. "Where did you serve?" he asked. "Afghanistan. Kandahar province," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I was there in 2019. Tell me, from your perspective on the ground, what was the biggest strategic mistake command made?" For the next hour, we talked. I spoke about the fatal disconnect between the intelligence gathered on the ground and the decisions made in sterile command centers thousands of miles away. I spoke of the lessons you can only learn when your life and the lives of your soldiers depend on reading a room, on understanding human motivation, on seeing the attack before it happens. For the first time since I'd left the service, I wasn't translating myself. I was speaking my native language, the language of strategy, risk, and sacrifice. And I was sitting across from someone who was fluent. He listened, not interrupting, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his bourbon. "The problem with those venture capital boys in Silicon Valley," he said, his voice a low rumble, "is that they don't know what they're looking at. They look at you, and they see a soldier. They see a tool. I look at you, and I see a strategist, a weapon." He paused, then added, "There's someone here I want you to meet." He led me over to a table where a man was typing furiously on a laptop. He had an aura of restless energy, but his eyes were calm and incredibly sharp. "Kaylin Croft," the general said, "meet Akira Cotton. She has an idea I think you need to hear." Kaylin Kale Croft was a legend in his own right, a venture capitalist famous for finding unicorns, billion-dollar startups, before anyone else. He was the ultimate disruptor. He shut his laptop and looked at me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "The general says you're smart. I don't have time for a PowerPoint," Kale said bluntly. "Forget the business jargon and the market projections. Just tell me one thing. If you had unlimited resources, what would you build to keep this country safe?" This was my moment. The culmination of every failure, every insult, every lonely night in that warehouse. I didn't hesitate. In the clear, concise, unwavering voice of a commanding officer briefing a mission, I laid out my vision for Sentinel Dynamics. I spoke for 15 minutes, detailing my plan to fuse predictive AI with elite, on-the-ground human intelligence operatives, creating a proactive security force unlike any other. When I finished, the bar was silent around our table. Kyle looked at General Cole, who simply raised an eyebrow. Then Kale turned back to me, and a slow grin spread across his face. It was the grin of a predator who had just found its prize. "I'm in for the seed round," he said, the words hitting me with the force of a physical blow. $5 million. We'll work out the details next week." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple, black business card. "Welcome to the fight, Miss Cotton." It wasn't just the money. It was the words, "Welcome to the fight." It was the first time in my civilian life that someone saw me as a warrior, not a charity case. It was validation. That night, I didn't go out and celebrate. I went back to my cheap hotel room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared out the window at the relentless, glittering neon of the Las Vegas Strip. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I cried. They weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The crushing weight of being utterly alone had finally lifted. General Cole had given me mentorship. Kale had given me the arsenal. I had found them. The first two members of my new unit. The long, brutal battle for my own survival was finally over. The war to build my empire had just begun. Before descending from my office, I paused. My hand went to my desk drawer and pulled out a small black business card with simple silver lettering. Kaylin Croft. I ran my thumb over the embossed name, the memory of that night in Las Vegas, a reinforcing bulkhead against the storm I was about to walk into. Kale's words echoed in my mind. "Welcome to the fight." He was right. And this was just one more battle. I slid the card back into the drawer, my resolve hardening into armor, and walked out. Conference Room 3, or as we call it, the Situation Room, is not a comfortable place. It has no windows. The walls are soundproofed, dark gray panels embedded with tactical display screens. The only furniture is a massive, severe table of polished ebony and cold-rolled steel, surrounded by 12 ergonomic but unforgiving chairs. The entire room is a carefully designed psychological tool for interrogations and high-stakes negotiations. It's a place that strips you of your defenses. And sitting there, huddled together in the middle of this vast, intimidating space, were the Thorns. They looked like shipwreck survivors washed up on a hostile shore, their worn clothes and anxious faces utterly alien in this world of sterile power. Marcus, my head of security, gave me a subtle nod from his post outside the reinforced door as I entered. I didn't take the seat at the head of the table. That would have been too obvious, too theatrical. Instead, I leaned against the far wall, my arms crossed over my chest, maintaining a deliberate, unbridgeable distance. I was not hosting a meeting, I was observing a specimen. Genevieve, ever the performer, was the first to speak. She stood up, her hands clasped together as if in prayer, and fixed me with a look of practiced maternal concern. Her voice trembled, a masterpiece of artificial emotion. "Akira, my dear," she began, taking a tentative step forward. "Oh, thank God we found you. I have prayed every single day, every day for 16 years, that you were safe." I said nothing. I didn't even blink. I just held her gaze with a flat, empty stare. It was a technique I'd learned for breaking down an opponent's composure. Let them perform for an empty theater. Her voice faltered, the rehearsed lines dying on her lips as she wilted under the weight of my silence. She slowly sank back into her chair. Serafina, always impatient, tried to fill the void. "You look different, Akira," she said, her eyes sweeping over my tailored suit, my confident posture, the sheer oppressive wealth of the room. "Successful." The word came out like a curse, dripping with an envy so thick it was practically choking her. I remained silent. I was following a simple rule of interrogation. Let the subject talk. Let them fill the silence. They will inevitably reveal their weaknesses, their motives, their desperation. And they did. Sterling, the golden prince who once walked through life as if he owned it, couldn't bring himself to look at me. He stared at his hands, his voice a low, humiliated mumble as he began their report of failure. He chronicled the downfall of the Thorn Empire with the detached tone of a man reading an obituary. He spoke of how Silas's law firm had gone bankrupt after a catastrophic malpractice suit. He confessed, his voice barely a whisper, that he himself had been disbarred for embezzling funds from a client's trust. Then he gestured toward Serafina, who recounted how her fairy tale marriage to a wealthy real estate developer had ended in a bitter divorce, leaving her with 2 children and no assets. They laid their ruin at my feet, a pathetic tapestry of bad decisions and collapsed arrogance. They were trying to build a case for my pity, to appeal to a sense of obligation they had never honored themselves. And through it all, my analytical mind was processing their words, noting a critical omission. Not once. Not a single one of them said the 2 words that might have mattered. "We're sorry." They weren't confessing their sins. They were presenting an invoice for their failures. Finally, it was Silas's turn. He cleared his throat, attempting to summon the booming, authoritative voice that had once been his primary weapon. But all that came out was a thin, reedy version of it, a ghost of his former power. "Akira," he began, trying to meet my eyes but failing. "The Thorn family legacy, everything we've built for generations, is on the verge of collapse." He paused, gathering himself for the final pitch. "We require an investment, a capital injection to rebuild." He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. $2 million. The number hung in the air, obscene in its audacity. But he wasn't finished. He made his final, fatal tactical error. He leaned forward, trying to manufacture a moment of connection, of fatherly wisdom. "This is your chance to heal this family, Akira," he said, his voice taking on a tone of magnanimous forgiveness, as if he were the one granting me a pardon. "It's your chance to finally put the past behind us, to truly become a Thorn, in every sense of the word." And there it was, the truth of their mission, laid bare. They hadn't come to apologize for throwing me away. They had come to sell my own name back to me for the price of $2 million. They were offering me the chance to buy a membership to the club that had blackballed me. The rage that I had suppressed for so long began to build inside me, a cold, dense star of fury. But on the outside, I remained perfectly still. I didn't answer his request. Instead, I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 5, 10. It grew heavy and suffocating in the soundproofed room. I watched them squirm under its weight. Genevieve began nervously twisting her scarf. Sterling's jaw started to twitch. Silas's false confidence evaporated, leaving only the raw desperation I'd first seen on the security monitor. My silence was more powerful than any outburst. It was a mirror, forcing them to sit and stare at the reflection of their own shameless, monstrous request. I was showing them, without saying a word, that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The debriefing was over, the subjects had revealed everything. It was time for the verdict. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. Silas's insulting offer, his offer to let me buy my way back into his ruined family, hung in the air between us. Beneath my tailored blazer, I could feel the cool, familiar weight of my grandmother's silver locket against my skin. It was my armor. Her voice echoed in my memory. Honor is the only thing they can't take from you, unless you give it away. Today, I wasn't giving away a single damn thing. I finally pushed myself off the wall, my movements slow and deliberate. I walked to the table but did not sit. I stood there, looking down at the four of them, a commander reviewing a captured enemy patrol. After a long moment, I spoke. My voice was devoid of emotion, as flat and sterile as a corporate earnings report. I have heard your request, I began, my tone formal and detached. And, speaking as the CEO of Sentinel Dynamics, I must inform you that our firm has a strict policy against investing in bankrupt family enterprises with a documented history of incompetent and unethical leadership. I paused, letting the words sink in. Your request for $2 million is denied. I had deliberately used the cold, cruel language of business to answer their desperate emotional plea. I was stripping the sentiment from the equation, leaving them with nothing but the blunt force of their own failure. They stared at me, utterly stunned. They had come prepared for a tearful argument, for a shouting match, for a negotiation. They were not prepared for a summary dismissal. Silas's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. The veneer of the respectable patriarch shattered, revealing the impotent rage beneath. He slammed his palm down on the ebony table. The sound was pathetic, a dull thud swallowed by the soundproofed walls. No, he sputtered, his voice cracking. You dare say no to us? After everything we did for you. We took in a homeless orphan. We gave you our name, a roof over your head, food on your table. You owe us. Genevieve, seeing her husband's attack, quickly joined the fray. Her voice, moments before trembling with fake sincerity, now became a venomous hiss. He's right. You owe us everything. Every success you have is built on the platform we gave you. You are an ungrateful, ungrateful child. That was it. The word. Ungrateful. It was the final, unforgivable insult. A grotesque lie that sought to erase 16 years of solitary struggle, of nights spent in cold warehouses, of being dismissed and humiliated. It was an attempt to claim ownership of a victory they had tried to prevent at every turn. That word was the spark that ignited the cold, compressed fury inside me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I took 2 steps forward, placed my hands flat on the table, and leaned in, my gaze locking directly onto Silas's. My voice was no longer cold and detached. It was low, sharp, and honed to a razor's edge. A debt? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Let's talk about debts, Silas. Let's clarify the ledger. You owe me a childhood free from daily humiliation. You owe me a high school graduation with a family in the audience. You owe me a goddamn apology for the day you threw me out of your house like a piece of trash. My gaze sliced over to Genevieve, whose face had gone pale. And you, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. You never gave me a platform. You handed me a ladder and then spent 20 years trying to saw through the rungs while my back was turned. Everything I have, I didn't get because of you. I got it in spite of you. I straightened up, my posture returning to that of a soldier at attention. I looked at each of their horrified faces. I had sworn an oath once to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I finally understood that sometimes the most dangerous domestic enemies are the ones who share your address. I had let them choose the battlefield for years. Now, the battle was on my terrain, and it was over. This meeting is concluded, I announced, my voice returning to the lethal calm of a commander in absolute control. I have heard your request. You will receive my formal response within 24 hours. I looked toward the door, my final words an undisguised command. Now get out of my building. If you have ever had to say something that needed to be said for years, I want you to hit that like button right now. And do me a favor, go down to the comments and just type the word, finally. I want to see how many of us have been waiting for a moment just like this one. My finger moved to a small unmarked button on the table's control console. I pressed it. With a silent, pneumatic hiss, the heavy door to the Situation Room slid open. Standing framed in the doorway was Marcus. At 6'4", the former Navy SEAL was an imposing wall of muscle and quiet capability. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but his message perfectly, terrifyingly clear. The time for talking was over. The time for escorting had begun. The Thorns stared at him, then back at me, their faces a mixture of shock and terror. For the first time in their coddled, privileged lives, they were utterly, completely powerless. And they knew it. The moment the Situation Room door hissed shut behind the Thorns, the air changed. The oppressive tension of their presence vanished, replaced by the clean, cold hum of operational readiness. I did not sit down. I did not take a breath to process what had just happened. The emotional battle was over. The strategic counteroffensive was just beginning. I walked back to the head of the table, activated the secure communication console, and convened my war council. This wasn't a meeting for my business executives. This was for my real inner circle. On the main holographic display, 3 faces appeared. Julian Vance, my general counsel. A shrewd, silver-haired man who had spent 20 years as a top prosecutor at the Department of Justice. Anya Sharma, my director of intelligence, a cool, unflappable woman who had run clandestine operations for the CIA in the Middle East. And finally, General Marcus Cole, his familiar, steady presence grounding the entire operation. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. My briefing was concise, stripped of all emotion. At 1400 hours, I was approached by 4 individuals representing the Thorn family. I began, my voice the calm, measured tone of a commander. They presented a request for a capital injection of $2 million. I denied the request. They responded with accusations of ingratitude and indebtedness. I paused. I have informed them they will receive a formal response within 24 hours. Anya, I need the full dossier on Project Legacy. Julian, I need you to begin drafting. Anya, a master of understatement, allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Ma'am, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Project Legacy has been an active file since the company's inception. We've had a red team running passive monitoring on the Thorns for years. A red team, in our world, is a unit that plays the role of the adversary to find weaknesses in your own systems. For me, the Thorns were always a potential vulnerability, a ghost in the machine. Monitoring them wasn't an act of revenge, it was prudent risk mitigation. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. That was the lesson from the book my grandmother had given me, the first principle of my entire life. On the main screen, Anya brought up the encrypted file. Its contents began to populate the display. It was a meticulous, chillingly complete record of their self-destruction. There were business emails Silas had sent to a colleague years ago, discovered during a routine digital background check, in which he referred to my military career as a shameful embarrassment for the family. There were archived social media posts from Serafina's college years, where she and her friends had mocked a picture of me in my uniform, calling it my cheap Halloween costume. There was more. Financial records showing Sterling had quietly manipulated his parents into removing my name from a small educational trust Theodora had set up for all her grandchildren. Every piece of data was time-stamped, verified, and legally obtained. It was a clinical autopsy of a family's character, or lack thereof. Julian, I said, turning my attention to my lawyer. I have no intention of filing a lawsuit. That's a war of attrition, and I don't have the time. I want to end this, permanently. Julian nodded, his mind already working through the legal angles. A messy public fight benefits no one. A quiet, decisive victory is strategically superior. What are your terms of surrender? I'm not writing a letter, Julian, I stated. We're going to draft a formal legal document. Title it Memorandum of Relationship and Obligation. Julian's eyebrows shot up in appreciation. In it, I continued, we will systematically list every instance of documented emotional, financial, and psychological abuse and abandonment. Each claim will be hyperlinked to the corresponding evidence from Anya's file. We will build an irrefutable case that no obligation, legal or moral, has ever existed from my side of the ledger. In fact, we will prove the debt runs entirely in the other direction. General Cole, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. That's a kill shot, Akira. You're not just rejecting them. You're dismantling their entire narrative, their very identity. That's the point, General, I replied. They came here to sell me a story about family. I'm going to respond with the truth. But I wasn't finished. A simple rejection was defense. I needed to go on the offensive, to end this conflict for good. There's one more component, I said, my team listening intently. The memorandum will include an offer. Anya looked surprised. An offer? Not for them, I clarified. For the children. Serafina has 2 kids, Orion and Lyra. They are innocent in all of this. Julian, you will draft a proposal to establish a fully funded, independently managed educational trust. It will cover their entire college education, with a generous stipend. But it comes with one non-negotiable condition. I looked at each of them. To activate the trust, all 4 of them must sign a legally binding, permanent restraining order and non-disclosure agreement. They will agree to never again contact me, my employees, or any company affiliate in any form for the rest of their natural lives. If they violate it even once, the trust is dissolved and our legal team will sue them into oblivion. Julian let out a low whistle. Akira, that's brilliant. It's a strategic masterstroke. You show compassion, which makes you unimpeachable. But you use that compassion to get exactly what you want, their permanent and total removal from your life. You put them in a position where they cannot win. If they refuse, they're denying their own children a future out of sheer pride. If they accept, they surrender all power they ever thought they had over you. Exactly, I said. They came for money. I'll give them a choice between their greed and their children's future. Let's see what kind of family they really are. For the next several hours, we worked. Anya compiled the evidence. Julian drafted the language, turning my strategy into an ironclad legal document. I reviewed every line, every piece of data, ensuring it was not just an emotional response, but a precise, surgical strike. By midnight, it was done. A single, encrypted PDF file that held the entire weight of the last 20 years of my life. I sat alone in the situation room, the document open on the main screen. My formal response, my Declaration of Independence, my weapon of truth. My finger rested on the mouse, the cursor hovering over the send button on the secure email addressed to Silas Thorne's lawyer. There was no hesitation. I clicked. The next morning at precisely 9 a.m., a professional courier from Sentinel Dynamics, dressed in a crisp, unmarked uniform, delivered a heavy, secure lockbox to a shabby law office in a rundown part of McLean. Inside, the entire Thorne family was gathered, their faces etched with a desperate, last-ditch hope. Their lawyer, a weary-looking man named Peterson, signed for the package. From my command center, I watched a single indicator on my screen. Julian, my general counsel, was already at Peterson's office, a silent observer to ensure the terms were presented correctly. My only connection to the scene was a secure, open audio line to Julian's earbud. I wouldn't see their faces, but I would hear everything. There's no check-in here, Peterson said, his voice tinny through the feed. I heard the click of the lockbox opening. It's a tablet, heavily encrypted. The Thornes crowded around his desk. Their final hope was that I'd had a change of heart, that I'd sent a settlement offer. As Peterson powered on the device and keyed in the one-time access code, the document I had prepared appeared on the screen, its title stark and clinical, Memorandum of Relationship and Obligation. A heavy silence descended on the room. I could hear the faint, frantic tapping as Peterson scrolled. The initial sound from the thorns was confused murmuring, which then morphed into sharp, disbelieving gasps. Their hope was curdling into horror. They were scrolling through the autopsy of their own cruelty. Every exhibit was a digital receipt for a past sin, presented without emotion or commentary. Exhibit A. An email from Silas Thorne to a fellow lawyer at the Chevy Chase Club, dated 10 years ago. Subject: Family Matters. Body: The girl has chosen to make a spectacle of herself with this embarrassing military fixation. It's a shameful stain on our family name, but we must endure it. I heard a strangled noise. It sounded like Silas. Exhibit B. A series of archived text messages from Serafina to a friend during my first deployment. OMG, saw a pic of Akira in her little soldier outfit. Looks like a cheap Halloween costume. So tacky. Can't wait till she's done playing army so we don't have to talk about it anymore. A sob broke the silence. Genevieve. Exhibit C. Digital bank records and a sworn affidavit from a former family accountant, detailing how Sterling had quietly convinced his parents to restructure a small trust fund left by my grandmother, specifically excluding my name under the guise of streamlining the estate. That's not true. That's taken out of context, Sterling stammered, his voice thin and panicked. Each click of the scroll wheel was another detonation, another lie exposed, another self-serving memory obliterated by a cold, hard fact. They weren't reading accusations. They were reading their own history, a history they thought was buried forever. The room was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of their implosion, hyperventilating breaths, choked sobs, and frantic, useless whispers. And then, I knew they had reached the final section. The offer. The checkmate. After a long, stunned silence, Peterson, their lawyer, spoke. His voice was flat, the sound of a man who knows the battle is already lost. Well, he said with a heavy sigh. She's offering to set up a fully funded educational trust for your children, Serafina. Ivy League money. It's incredibly generous. A flicker of hope returned to their voices. So, there's a negotiation? Silas asked, his voice weak. No, Peterson said bluntly. There isn't. The offer is conditional. To activate the trust, all four of you must sign this. I could hear the rustle of paper as he slid a printed document across the desk, the binding agreement Julian had brought with him. It's a permanent restraining order and a non-disclosure agreement. It legally forbids any of you from ever contacting her, her company, or any of her associates again, for any reason. If you sign, the kids are set for life. If you violate it, the trust is voided, and she will sue you with the full force of this evidence, which, I might add, will then become public record. The horrifying reality of my strategy finally landed. The checkmate was revealed. She isn't suing us, Genevieve whimpered. Peterson's voice was grim. Mrs. Thorne, you need to understand what's happening. She isn't suing you. She's erasing you. She doesn't want to fight. She doesn't want your money. She just wants you to be gone. De oppresso liber. To free the oppressed. I wasn't just freeing myself. I was freeing two innocent children from the poison of their legacy, using the Thorns' own greed as the key. The final sounds I heard were of a family completely breaking down, not with remorse, but with the agony of total defeat. Silas wasn't yelling anymore. He was trembling with the pathetic rage of an old king whose castle had just been turned to dust by a ghost he thought he had banished. Genevieve was weeping openly now, crying for the loss of her last lifeline. Sterling and Serafina were utterly silent, the shock having rendered them mute. They had come to my gate as predators, confident they could manipulate the past. But they had miscalculated. I wasn't the past. I was the future, and I had come prepared. You have 1 hour to sign. Julian's calm voice cut through their despair. The offer is non-negotiable and expires at 10:30 a.m. There was no debate. There was no way out. They had lost. Silas Thorne, the man who had thrown me out with a roar, was now brought to his knees by a whisper of truth. He had spent a lifetime obsessed with his name, his power, his legacy. and now the adopted daughter he had deemed unworthy had taken it all away with a single, encrypted file. Through the earpiece, I heard Julian's final report. "He's picking up the pen, Akira." There was a pause, and then the only sound in the world was the faint, dry scratching of a pen nib on paper. It was the sound of a signature, the sound of a surrender, the sound of a dynasty turning to ash. The moment Julian's voice confirmed the signature, a profound sense of quiet descended upon me. The war was over. The enemy had surrendered unconditionally. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely and totally free from the shadow of the Thorn family. The relief was immense, a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. And then, the aftershock began. My phone, which had been silent on my desk, began to vibrate incessantly. It was a digital bombardment, the last desperate salvo from a defeated army. A string of voicemails appeared, the transcriptions flashing on my screen. It was Genevieve, her message a torrent of weaponized tears and accusations. "How could you be so cruel? So heartless? After all we did for you." Then came the emails from Silas, long rambling manifestos attempting to justify his past actions with weak legal arguments and twisted logic, as if he could still win the argument on paper. And finally, a barrage of text messages from Serafina, each one a venomous little dart of pure hatred and blame. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't read past the subject line of a single email. I watched the notifications pile up with the same detached calm I'd felt in the Situation Room. This wasn't a family drama anymore. This was a security breach. I opened my laptop and initiated a protocol my company uses for high-level clients dealing with digital harassment: isolate and neutralize threat. I pulled up their contact information: Silas Thorn, phone number, block, email address, block, social media profiles, block, Genevieve Thorn, block, 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 Sterling, Serafina. With each click, another door was sealed, another ghost was exorcised. I was building a final, impenetrable firewall, not with code and algorithms, but with cold, deliberate will. When the last contact was blocked, my phone fell silent. The digital storm was over. But the expected feeling of triumph, of soaring victory, never came. Instead, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, so profound it felt like it went down to my bones. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the past 48 hours vanished, leaving a strange, hollow emptiness in its wake. The war I had been fighting, in one form or another for over 20 years, was finally finished. And now that the noise of the conflict was gone, the silence it left behind was unnerving. My private line rang. It was Cale Croft. "The general told me the operation was a success," he said, his voice warm. "Just calling to check on my best investment. You doing okay, Akira?" I looked out the window at the quiet, peaceful forest that surrounded my home, and for the first time, I answered a question without knowing the answer. "Honestly, Cale." "I don't know," I said, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "I won. I know I won. But it feels like I just attended a funeral." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Cale said something that unlocked the entire complicated feeling inside me. "Then give yourself time to mourn, Akira," he said gently. "Even if you're only mourning the family you should have had." He was right. I wasn't mourning the Thorns. I was mourning the ghost of a family, the idea of a home, the unconditional love I'd always craved and never received from them. I was mourning the girl who stood alone in the rain at her graduation. That evening, General Cole came by. He let himself in and found me sitting in front of the unlit fireplace in the main living room. He didn't come as my board advisor or my mentor. He came as a friend. He poured 2 glasses of a fine Kentucky bourbon, handed one to me, and sat down in the armchair opposite mine. We didn't talk about the Thorns or Sentinel dynamics. We just sat in a comfortable silence, watching the evening light fade over the trees. He started telling me stories about his soldiers, about the young men and women who had faced down unimaginable horrors on the battlefield, only to find themselves lost in the quiet chaos of coming home. He spoke of the paradox of peace, how the end of a war is often the beginning of a different, more difficult fight. Victory on the battlefield is only half the battle, Akira, he said, swirling the bourbon in his glass. Anyone can survive the war. The real challenge is figuring out how to live in the peace that follows. He took a slow sip, his gaze steady and kind. He looked at me, not as a CEO or a strategist, but as a soldier who had just come home from her longest deployment. You've spent your entire adult life with a single mission: to survive them. To beat them, he continued. Well, you did it. Mission accomplished. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a new intensity. So, I have to ask you, soldier. Now, what is your mission? His question cut through the fog of my exhaustion. Now, what is your mission? For 20 years, my mission had been defined by them, by their cruelty and my reaction to it. I had built my fortress, my company, my entire life as a defense against them. But now, the threat was gone. The walls I had built were no longer holding an enemy out. They were just holding me in. My hand instinctively went to my neck, my fingers closing around the familiar, cool shape of my grandmother's locket. I thought of her legacy. It wasn't the $5,000. It was her words. Loyalty and honor make a family. Her legacy wasn't about building walls. It was about service. It was about honor. And in that quiet moment, sitting by the fire with the only true father figure I had ever known, I realized what my new mission was. It wasn't to keep building higher walls. It was to start building bridges. Not for the Thorns. Their bridge was burned forever. But for all the others. For the old Marine in the VA office. For the soldiers the general spoke of. For every person who was fighting their own lonely war in no man's land, just like I had. I had spent my life freeing myself from my oppressors. De oppresso, liber. It was time to make that more than just a philosophy. It was time to make it my new mission. 6 months after the Thorns signed their surrender, I stood on a bright, sunny stage, a pair of oversized scissors in my hand. Beside me, General Cole was beaming, his pride so palpable it felt like a physical warmth. Before us was a crowd of veterans, local officials, and the families whose lives were about to change. We were cutting the ribbon on the first community center for the Theodora Vance Foundation. The general's question that night by the fire, "Now what is your mission?" had become my new call to arms. I realized my grandmother's true legacy wasn't the silver locket or the $5,000. It was the principle she lived by. Loyalty and honor make a family. I took a significant portion of my personal fortune and built an empire, not of technology, but of compassion. The foundation was dedicated to providing everything I never had and everything my fellow veterans deserved. Job placement, world-class mental health counseling, and educational scholarships for their children. It was my answer to the cold waiting room of the VA, my rebuttal to the indifferent civilian world. It was my new mission. As I snipped the wide blue ribbon, the applause that erupted felt more meaningful than any business deal I'd ever closed. This was a different kind of victory. It wasn't about defeating an enemy, it was about building a sanctuary. That sense of sanctuary was never more real than on Thanksgiving Day. The crisp November air was filled with the scent of wood smoke from the outdoor fire pit and the rich aroma of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie from the kitchen. On the wide stone terrace overlooking the rolling Virginia hills, a long table was set, not for politicians or business partners, but for my family. My real family. General Cole was there, laughing with his wife. Cale Croft was deep in conversation with my head of security, Marcus, probably debating the merits of some obscure piece of technology. My senior leadership team from Sentinel Dynamics was there with their spouses, their children chasing each other across the lawn with shrieks of delight. And scattered among them were the first veterans the Foundation had helped, a young Marine who we had just placed in a top cybersecurity job, and an older Army medic, just like the one I'd met at the VA, who was now getting the counseling he had needed for years. The scene was a beautiful, chaotic masterpiece of joy and belonging. It was the polar opposite of the stiff, silent holiday dinners I had endured at the Thorn Mansion. This wasn't a performance of family for outside appearances. This was the real thing. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting a warm, golden glow over everything, we all gathered around the table. I stood at the head, a glass of wine in my hand, and looked out at the faces smiling back at me. They were the architects of my new life, the people who had stood with me, believed in me, and fought alongside me. I didn't have a prepared speech. I just spoke from the heart. I think I spent the first half of my life looking for a family, I began, my voice thick with an emotion I no longer tried to suppress. I thought it was something you were born into, something you were given. But I've learned that a real family isn't something you find, it's something you build. I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. It's built day by day, on a foundation of loyalty. It's reinforced with sacrifice, and it's tested in the battles you fight for each other. You are all my builders. You helped me create this. My gaze fell on the general, then on Kale. To me, this is home. Thank you, I finished, my voice catching slightly. Thank you for being my unit. A chorus of, "Hear, hear," and clinking glasses followed. We ate, we drank, and we shared stories late into the evening. The sound of their laughter was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Later, as the fire pit crackled and the stars began to appear in the deep purple sky, I stood alone on the porch, nursing a final glass of wine. I watched Kale showing a few of the kids a constellation on his phone, and the general telling a story that had a group of veterans roaring with laughter. The warmth of the scene washed over me, a profound and lasting peace. My hand went to my neck, my fingers closing around the familiar silver locket. For so long, it had been the only tangible proof that I was loved, a relic from a past I had to survive. But now, it felt different. It was no longer a symbol of what I had lost, but a reminder of the principle upon which I had built everything new. I finally understood what a true legacy was. It wasn't about bloodlines or a family name passed down through generations of portraits in a stuffy hall. It wasn't about money or property. A true legacy is the honor you live by, the loyalty you give, and the love you create and share with the world. It's what you build, not what you inherit. Maya Angelou once wrote that you can't control the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. The thorns had tried to reduce me to nothing, an orphan, an obligation, a disgrace. But they had failed. I may have been born into their family, but I had built my own, a unit, a team, a home. I was a soldier who had finally come home, not to a place, but to a feeling. The war was over. And I was, at long last, at peace. That's my story. It wasn't a story about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own legacy and building a family defined by loyalty, not blood. If my journey has resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to define your own worth, I hope you found a piece of your own strength in these words. Thank you for being here with me. Your support means the world. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Until then, remember to build your own legacy.